welcome to another historical fiction author chat. Today, we are going south to meet SARA ACKERMAN from Hawaii. Hello, SARA.
Hi.
Thank you for coming today. It's kind of great talking from Nova Scotia down to Hawaii. So but we're both humid. We're both in the air conditioning today.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to read Sarah's bio and then the synopsis to this beautiful book, Radar Girls. Now, I haven't read the whole book, but Amazon has a sneak peek that I recommend you go and read because it's really, really neat the way it opens. And we were talking a little bit. It's not that different from how I write, and I think you're going to really like it. So you'll hear a little bit of that later. So SARA ACKERMAN is a USA Today bestselling author who writes books about love and life and all of their messy and beautiful imperfections. She believes that the light is just as important as the dark and that the world is in need of uplifting and heartwarming stories. Ain't that the truth? Born and raised in Hawaii, she studied journalism and later earned graduate degrees in psychology and Chinese medicine. She blames Hawaii for her addiction to writing and sees no end to its untapped stories. She has a website and she's got all these links, which I will put on the bottom of this so you can go right to the book. And now a little bit about Radar Girls, an extraordinary story inspired by the real women's air raid defense, where an unlikely recruit and her sisters in arms forged their place in World War II history. Daisy Wilder prefers the company of horses to people, bare feet and salt water to high heels and society parties. Then, in the dizzying aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor, Daisy enlists in a top secret program, replacing male soldiers in a war zone for the first time. Under fear of imminent invasion, the wards guide pilots into blacked out airstrips and track unidentified planes across Pacific skies. But not everyone thinks the women are up to the job, and the new recruits must rise above their differences and work side by side despite the resistance and heartache they might feel along the way. With America's future on the line, Daisy's determined to prove herself worthy, and with the man she's falling for out on the front lines, she cannot fail. From radar towers on remote mountaintops to flooded bomb shelters, she'll need her new team when the stakes are highest, because the most important battles are fought and won together. This inspiring and uplifting tale of pioneering, unsung heroines vividly transports the reader to wartime Hawaii, where one woman's call to duty leads her to find courage, strength, and sisterhood. Yay, I love the sound of that. It sounds beautiful.
Thank you for reading that.
Yes, it's beautiful. I think everyone's going to love this. So now, Sarah, I'm going to disappear, and you are going to take us away and read, and then we can chat after.
Sounds good.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So chapter 1, The Sky Falls. This is December 7th, 1941, Wailua, Oahu. On Sunday mornings, while everyone else was singing and praying to the Lord above, Daisy could be found underwater with the pufferfish and the eagle rays. Not that she had anything against God. In fact, she spoke to him often. But you couldn't eat the Bible. She stood with her toes buried in the cool sand and surveyed the water. Clouds blocked the low sun, but a few beams shot out, creating blue islands of light. The big question of the day was whether to swim towards Haleiwa or Mokuleia. A swell had filled in during the night, and the low rumble of surf on the outer reef cut through the quiet. Going north would be more protected, so she decided on that. Just before she dove in, her borrowed horse, Moon, whinnied loudly. The animal reared up, straining at the rope that tied him to the ironwood tree. "What is it, boy?" Daisy said, looking around for any stray dogs or something that could have spooked the animal. There was nothing out of the ordinary to be seen, just open beach and bushes. She walked back to the nervous horse and stood next to him, speaking in a calm voice. "Just relax and eat your grass. I'll be back soon." Moon snorted and swung his head away from her. His neck was still slick with sweat from galloping down the beach. She had known he was fast, but to feel him under her bare legs like that was something different altogether. He was speed and power and grace all mixed up in one big, beautiful horse. Daisy had taken a risk in riding him this morning. Nalu, the old horse that she often rode, had a swollen knee when she'd arrived at the stables. Moon happened to be in the next stall and had pranced around with a look that said, "Get me out of here." He and Daisy had developed a deep bond over the past few months, solidified by the basket of guavas that she brought to work every day. She had been itching to take him out on her own. Tall, black, and spirited, Moon was without a doubt the most beautiful horse she'd ever met, and the most expensive. She was smitten, to say the least. As long as she was back before church lit out, no one would ever know. Daisy felt bad leaving the horse on the beach in an uneasy state, but she needed to be the first one out. The Chen brothers often beat her to the best spots, and she wanted to give them a taste of their own medicine. Last Sunday, she had come home with an octopus, an alua half as big as she was, and 3 lobsters. They had eaten well this week, and her mother had even put on an apron and made her famous lobster casserole. It had been a long time since she'd last made it. Daisy dared to hope that maybe her mother was turning a corner, but hope had let her down over the years. December brought cooler water, and her skin prickled as she dived in. Visibility was only about 15 feet because of the swell, but it hardly mattered because she knew every contour of the reef, all the resident fish families, and even the local black-tipped sharks that patrolled the coastline. With each kick, the knots in her back loosened. Working 6 days a week took a toll on her, but who else was going to earn the money? Certainly not her mom, Louise. And without the money, there would be no food and no house. As Daisy moved along, clouds gave way to sunlight that warmed her back. Schools of yellow tang and manini parted around her, glowing. Her route took her out about 100 yards before she veered right along a ledge that dropped onto a sandy floor. Tufts of green limu grew out of the cracks, and spiny vana dotted the coral. She kept an eye out for shell trails. Then, all around her, the water hummed. She tasted fuel on her tongue. She popped her head up and scanned the horizon for any signs of a ship. But soon it was obvious the sound was not coming from the sea, but rather the sky. Several planes buzzed just overhead before banking and heading towards the pineapple fields. Then another and another. It must be more military training. But on Sunday, she dived on and continued on. With the swell also came current, and she fought to stay on course. It took her twice as long to reach her destination, though along the way she plucked 2 hand-sized tiger cowries hidden in a crevice. Those often brought a good price. When she reached part of the reef full of lobster holes, Daisy set her spear on a coral head and put on her gloves. Lucky thing the tide was low. The first few holes were empty, but she finally caught sight of a set of spindly antennas. Her heart dropped. That hole was off limits. Last time she'd nearly had her arm taken off by a moray eel as thick as her torso. She passed by the other holes again, stuck her hand in a few, but came up with nothing. Hungry and tired after a long week at the ranch, she decided to head back to Moon. The current had picked up, and she fought to make any headway, dreaming of scrambled eggs, steamed watercress, and Portuguese sausage. As she approached the beach, the water started buzzing again. She kept swimming and kicked down after a pepillo. Military maneuvers had ramped up lately, but she never paid them any mind. There were more immediate things to worry about. By now, the buzzing had turned into a deep vibration of the water all around. When she came up for air, she found a rock to stand on to see what was happening. From behind the ironwood trees, less than 50 feet out over the water, a plane with red circles under its wings zoomed towards her, passing directly over her head, followed by an olive green plane with a white star on its side, the kind she was used to seeing, a P-40 Warhawk. The rat-tat-tat of gunfire had her diving back into the water. What kind of idiots were these, shooting real guns over a residential area? Anger bunched in her chest. Unless... From shore came a loud whinny. She saw Moon rear up on the rope, his front hooves pawing at the air. Daisy half swam, half ran towards the beach, desperate to get to him and calm him down. The lead plane suddenly pulled up its nose, flew straight up, and banked around. They were both heading back towards the shoreline, weaving only a dozen feet off the water. She dived to the bottom again and held on to a rock for as long as her lungs would allow. After coming up for air, she made a mad dash for Moon. To hell with the planes. She was almost to him when the rope snapped. She reached out, her hand closing around the frayed edge, burning as the rope slipped through. And then he was gone. Moon, no, Daisy screamed. He was tearing down the beach toward Haleiwa at a full gallop. She took a few desperate strides after him. Above, the two planes rolled and twisted at impossible angles. There was no mistaking the fact that this was no drill. She dived back behind the massive ironwood tree, cowering in its folds. She choked on her breath, and her whole body trembled. Stay calm. For a few seconds, it sounded like the planes were heading away, but moments later they returned. She risked a peek. This time, the Japanese plane was in hot pursuit, and the P-40 had a line of smoke pouring from its engine. Please, God, let him make it. They were headed right for her, yet she couldn't pull her gaze away. As the Japanese plane was steadily gaining on the Warhawk, the American pilot pulled into a barrel roll and miraculously reversed the Zero's advantage. Whoever he was, the man knew how to fly. Then quick bursts of gunfire ripped open the Zero's fuselage and shattered the canopy. Daisy saw the Japanese pilot slump forward as his plane burst into flame and fell toward the sea. She ducked back behind the tree just as the explosion cut through the sky, rattling her teeth and piercing her ears. A loud splash and the sound of metal crunching on rock told her everything she needed to know. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't lift her. In a panic, she looked down to see if she had been hit by something, but all her body parts were intact. As she tried to catch her breath, Daisy watched the crippled P-40 skim the trees, heading towards the airstrip just down the way. She thought of the Japanese pilot, locked away in his watery grave. She thought of the American pilot and was thankful for his survival. And then she thought of Moon, terrified and frantic and running wild. She prayed he didn't get himself hurt. Even as it was, she would be fired, no question about that, unless she came up with a brilliant reason why she'd taken him, and then lost him. Ironwood cones cut into her bare thighs. A few minutes passed and she tried to stand again. This time her legs obeyed and she walked out onto the beach. Not 30 feet offshore, the plane lay in several charred pieces on the reef, smoldering. The cockpit was underwater and the smell of burnt metal mixed with salt water and gasoline. She felt sick to her stomach. Where had the Japanese plane come from? And more important, were there more? Maybe she should have paid more attention to the warnings. She thought about going after Moon again. She owed him that much. This had happened on her watch, and the poor horse had been terrified. But then she thought about her mother. Daisy took off running towards home. There was no point in trying to catch up with Moon anyway. He would be long gone. Her mother, on the other hand, was likely to have worked herself into a bad state if she was awake. You never knew with her. Halfway to the house she shared with her mother, a distant roar came from somewhere behind the mountains. Or was it just the sound of huge surf that had a way of bouncing off the cliff walls? Daisy stopped to catch her breath and make sure she wasn't imagining things. Time slowed. The beach was as lovely as ever, sand white and fine and scattered with broken shells. Ironwood and coconut trees in equal abundance rustled in the light trade winds. Squinting, she noticed a rain cloud had moved off the tip of Kayana Point, causing a rainbow fragment to form just off the ocean. The sound grew louder, like a swarm of bees had taken up residence between her ears. The ground began to rumble. She started off again down the beach as fast as her lungs allowed. Moments before, a wall of plains appeared over the WWII mountains. Some were mere feet off the cliff, above the cliffs, while others stayed high. They were stacked and rode so neatly they seemed to be in a motion picture. Daisy beelined up to the trees and doubled over. She spit up salt water. Every single one of the planes had red circles, painted on their wings or their sides. A whole sky full of Japanese planes, hundreds, and not one American plane in sight.
Wow. That was great. That was great. And I know I was reading it on online and going, oh, I love the way she had that the fighter plane coming right at her. You could just feel it there. Are you a diver? Have you gone under and gone after some of those things?
Yeah, I don't scuba dive, but I just snorkel. But growing up here in the islands, it's kind of just part of the way of life here. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you seem to know an awful lot about all those little creatures that she had to catch. It's a foreign language to us up here, at least to me. So
Mhm.
it was great. And you're from Hawaii originally, right?
Yes, I was born and raised here, and my mom's parents came over from Minnesota and South Dakota in the 30s, worked in education, and then my father's parents go back a few more generations. And so, yeah, I grew up here. My parents grew up here, and we've been here for a while.
And then your books explore that. I've noticed that you have 4 books and they're all Hawaii based. So really exploring the local, everything that's going on in your part of the country, which I love, since that's sort of what I do way up here. But tell me what it was that got you started writing on these novels, and then to zero in on Hawaii is fascinating.
Okay. Well, so initially, being raised here as a young girl, I grew up on my grandparents' stories and my parents' stories of the war, because, at that point, things were still pretty fresh in everybody's mind, I feel like. And my grandpa was the principal of a school on the Big Island, and my grandma was a teacher. And the area where they were in had a Marine camp, Camp Taro, nearby, where they were training for Iwo Jima. And there was 50,000 Marines came through there. So it was a giant military presence. And they would just be camped out on my grandparents' floor on the weekends. And my mom was a little girl at the time. And my grandma, she always talked about it. It was just this, even 40 years later, it just seemed like the war and those soldiers were always on her mind. It was just such an important time in their lives. And so I grew up on that. And what I think the original spark, though, was she always talked about this lion, an African lion that the soldiers had brought here.
Oh, wow.
And he was their mascot. And so I started researching. I'd written a couple books unpublished, hadn't had an agent yet. And I started researching this lion because I didn't know his name. And I thought, well, nowadays there's bound to be something about this lion. And so I found there's a bunch of pictures of him and articles written on their site about Roscoe, this lion. And so I decided I would kind of model my story around that and also add in a mystery. And it was about the women who were in the town and had their interactions with the soldiers. And so that's really what got me into it. My grandmother has a lot more stories, and that kind of tied over to the next novels too.
So that was your first book.
That was my first book, Island of Sweet Pies and Soldiers. Yeah.
Oh, neat. And what were the other ones called?
The Lieutenant's Nurse, that is a story of a woman coming over on the Lurleen, on the Matson steamship, which actually came over a couple days before Pearl Harbor got bombed. And so that is a story about the nurses here. And then Red Sky Over Hawaii is set at the volcano. There was an internment camp up there during the war, and that had Japanese prisoners before they were sent off. And then Radar Girls is my fourth.
That's really interesting. In the internment camps, we had Japanese internment camps up here as well, which is kind of interesting. I bet yours were a lot more crowded than ours were, but we did have them.
Well, in Hawaii, over half the population here was Japanese, and all our, the sugarcane plantations, everything, we relied on them for work as workers, and they were starting stores and that kind of thing. And it was just, so they only took a small percent here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So they took away people that they were worried about were like leaders in the community, anybody that ran a Japanese newspaper, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So yeah, there was so much suspicion, and yet it was just, Hawaii was at that point, a majority of the population was Japanese.
Right. Oh, wow. And so this book gets into the radar girls, which I find fascinating. There's so many World War II stories out now. And everybody, as you and I were talking about earlier, a lot of them are set in Europe or Eastern Europe. I've just finished one and reading one in Poland and all over the place. But mine are based on Canadians that have fought or have been a part of it, or how they lived their life during the war if they were still here. So yours is doing the same sort of thing. So then you ran into the story of the radar girls, that's fascinating. All that, the things that women started to do that changed the path of the war. How did you start to learn about them?
I found it, as I'm sure you probably do, when you're doing your research, you end up picking up little stories along the way and just file them for future use. So I came upon this article when I was researching for the lieutenant's nurse, and I thought it would just make a great story, and then filed it away. And then there wasn't a ton of information on these women, but I found a great book that was written by 4 of them, and first-hand accounts, and it was a fabulous book. So as soon as I read that, I knew, like, I have to write their story.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. Good for you. So what kind of writer are you? Are you an organized writer, which is something that I envy, or are you a plotter or a pantser? You write?
Well, before I had an agent and a publishing deal, I was pretty much a pantser. When I first wrote my first book, I have 3 unpublished books. I just sat down and wrote. I had no idea what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like with each book, it's gotten more and more that I'm planning, because, my publisher wants a long synopsis. I don't know if that is how it is for you too.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, but they want to know that I have the whole thing planned out, knowing that it will probably change, or it could change. Right.
Exactly.
But then it is helpful. I find it's helpful because I know you don't get stuck in these places that you don't know how to get yourself out of.
I really need to work on that. I've tried. I'm trying to get organized, but I'm just not good at it. But
I don't think it matters, though. There's so many authors out there that are in that same boat.
Yeah.
And when I'm writing, like I said, things totally change too.
Yes.
A new character appears, or this character that's supposed to die and ends up not dying. And I think they know that.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the magic about writing novels, isn't it? That we really never know how it's going to go, because the characters end up being in charge of most of it. You never know that. So you've got 4 books out now, and are they every year or every couple of years that you put them out, or?
It's been a little over a year. For like this last one, I think was 13 months. One was 15 months. And then next year will be coming out, I think, around a year. I don't have a release date, but sometime next summer.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you about, your next book. So what's that one called?
Well, I'm calling it The Last Plane to Honolulu. I don't know. They always change titles on me. Yeah. So actually, Radar Girls is the only one that wasn't changed, and my editor had come up with that. Even actually, when I first sent her an article, I said, "Would you be interested in this story? What do you think about this article?" And then she's like, "I love it." And then she just said at the bottom, she said Radar Girls. And
awesome.
And so that stayed. Anyway, so Last Plane to Honolulu is what it's called. It's a dual timeline. It's my first dual timeline. And I admire people that write them, because it was challenging for me. And it's so a dual timeline. There's a codebreaker, a female codebreaker that comes to Honolulu in 43, and then it's woven in with the 1965 storyline. And the connecting thread is a pilot, and kind of a mystery of this woman goes missing.
It is hard to write the dual timeline, isn't it? I ended up, I learned from the first time that I ended up writing basically 2 separate books. Writing one at a time. I think that's the only way to keep it straight in your head.
In here, that's what I did. I had polled a bunch of people and researched it, and it sounded like some people actually will just go chapter to chapter. Yeah. Which I just didn't think I could do. I felt like I need to know what happens in this 1943 before I can even, sorry, my dog's over here scratching, before I can know, what's going to happen in 1965.
Yeah, and it's too hard to really get into a story if you just shoot in a chapter here and there. You need to
Right.
do a whole section. I get that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna rush out there and buy this one because I really did love the first 4 chapters, and I think everybody watching, this is your kind of book, and it sounds like the rest of the series is too. I'm gonna have to look them all up. The book is on sale right now. It went on sale last month, right? I think.
Yeah, July 27th.
Good for you. Congratulations. So thank you very much for being here today. It was really nice to meet you, Sarah, and I hope that you can go diving soon and not come to the surface with a jet coming in your direction.
Yes, thank you. I know they're doing military maneuvers right now. They fly all around our house out in the ocean in front. And sometimes it just gives me a little bit of, an idea of what it was like back then.
Yeah.
Without the fear, but it's interesting.
That is. It's living the history in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for being here, for chatting with me.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Have a great day.
Bye.